Have you ever wondered what it's like to own your own business? Be your own boss? Welcome to Season 7 of Business Mentorship, Keepin' It Real, where we meet with corporate leaders who have taken the leap to business owner and join us as part of the Share Your Stories Online series. Hello, I'm Trish Tonak, and today we're going to meet a small business owner, celebrate their great idea, and introduce you to the person behind the logo. We invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the show. Our guest joins us from Hamilton, Ontario. Gucci Erasmus is the founder of My Gem Power. She's a Renaissance woman who has learned a lot driving at high speeds on racetracks, playing polo in her youth, and traveling across 3 continents. Her mind is happiest exploring and investigating, determining the most impactful way to integrate knowledge so that women can enjoy self-development journeys that are liberating and expanding. Gucci's going to share her story on entrepreneurship and give us a behind-the-scenes look into the life of a small business owner. Welcome.
Hi, Trish. Thanks for having me here.
You know, I have to say, you've really piqued my interest with your story. You know, racetracks and polo. How did that prepare you for corporate?
Well, I grew up in a family with older brothers, and my father actually designed one of the F1 racetracks in South Africa.
Wow.
So, my mom always said I was a very unfortunate little girl because I grew up around the sound of screaming engines and the smell of hot oil. And, I did like cars from a very early age. So my brothers would, first put me on their laps, etc. And later on, I just really discovered a love for driving. I have to say, I have never driven an automatic car ever in my life.
Wow.
And I have driven some really fabulous performance cars. So how driving on a racetrack has really helped me think about my entrepreneurial journey is really around decision making. You have to be very planful. You have to be quite centered in terms of your nervous system when you're driving at high speeds. You have to really also have a very high level hyper awareness of what's going on around you. And when you make a decision, you need to be comfortable that you can stick with it. And this was one of the things my father always said. His story was that if you're in a car and you're driving at speed and something comes into your pathway, you need to decide, am I going to hit it because that's the lesser evil, or am I going to go around it? And once you decide, don't waver. And I think that was really an interesting lesson for me in entrepreneurship, because it's important to be flexible, but it's also to be very clear on what decisions you're making. Because once you make a decision, you can then quickly assess, is it working or not, and make another decision. But I feel like if you're kind of wishy-washy, maybe you don't really get where you want to go in the time frame you want to get there. And then polo is interesting because I was the only person in my family who loved horses. And clearly I had a bent for speed early on. And polo is interesting as a team sport because, again, it happens very, very fast. And you have to be very sure of yourself, your horse, but you also have to be aware of what your teammates and the opponents are doing. And so I think kind of mental acuity and then being able to, again, assess what's going around you, look at the horizon and look at the immediacy of your situation with your horse's hooves and everything else. So that to me is like life in business.
Yeah, it's so true because, what you've really described for us is your personal life experience and how you've been able to translate that into transferable skills, really, right? Which we use all the time.
Exactly.
Now, you had a very stellar corporate career and you were very successful and you had opportunities to not only meet people, but continue to hone those skills in a different way. What gave you what was the driving force to you moving from corporate into entrepreneurship?
The number one thing, truthfully, was corporate politics. it became very tiring after 3 decades. That, I kept thinking, gosh, the new leadership or the new organization that I find myself in is going to be different. And then after a while, I would discover the same old things came up. And I suppose, truthfully, I shouldn't be shocked about that because my background is in psychology, in organizational psychology, and pressure makes people respond in certain ways unless they are really highly evolved and highly attuned to how their behavior impacts others. And when I eventually decided to shift out of corporate and into being an entrepreneur, there was one particular event. I was invited, I worked for a Swiss pharmaceutical company, and I was invited by a group of young intakes to be a panelist on what makes a great career. So I said, certainly. I had no idea. They didn't give us questions in advance, etc. And I said, how difficult can it be? So I arrived, sat down in this atrium with several hundred people, and this lovely young lady said, my first question is for you, what was the best part of your career? Now, that's a huge question.
Huge question. It is.
And so while my mind, my sort of critical thinking mind was engaging and deciding how to answer, my mouth opened and something came out of my mouth that I wasn't quite expecting, but it was 100% true. And what I said was everything that was never on my job description. Because in that moment, I actually realized that the most satisfying part of my working life, right from entry level and all the way through up into an executive role, was supporting others and particularly supporting women. It's still a very male-oriented world in large corporates. It's a hard place to be a woman, and it's a very hard place to be a woman if you're also juggling motherhood, etc. And I realized in that moment that my greatest satisfaction had come from all the support of women and men that I had coached over the years. And I was like, wow, that's what really makes me happy. I think it's time to make that the center of my life rather than the off-job description part of my life.
What a wonderful way to describe how, because we all are in tuned with titles. And when we're in corporate, those titles are married to job descriptions, right? I mean, that's the Bible. You follow that soup to nuts. But clearly you were moving outside of the job description and giving yourself the satisfaction that you needed in order to succeed and excel into a new position, right? So what a wonderful way to connect the dots with our viewing and listening audience and sort of say, just because everything that's written in your job description says XYZ doesn't mean that you can't pursue something else.
Exactly. I think actually as a leader, you have to make space for that. Now I'm an entrepreneur in a party of one, which is lovely. But I know that there are going to be people listening who are, leading a larger team. And it's really important in leadership, I think, to make space for truly being a leader rather than doing the stuff that is in your job description.
Yeah, it's the moving outside the comfort zone, right? It's taking a step outside the yellow brick road per se and kind of, testing the waters into something else.
I totally agree. And I also think that you don't need to have all the answers.
Right.
So when I think about the people that I supported sort of in those years with coaching, sometimes I had no idea what really would help them. But we worked together to co-create and explore. And that made me so much better at what I was doing.
Well, it's symbiotic then, right? Because as much as where you're giving information, you're receiving information. So it's that sharing of knowledge that really creates the opportunity, right?
100%.
Okay, so you've started in South Africa. Now you've mentioned you're in Europe, in Switzerland. How on earth did you end up in Canada? And, in Hamilton, Ontario, no less.
Well, my career journey was interesting because when I was still working in South Africa and I was working first for a consulting firm, I had some clients in London, in the UK. So I did some traveling. I had also spent 4.5 years living in Munich when I was a young adult. And those were very formative years for me. It was a wonderful time in my life. Then South Africa was going through significant changes and so on. And my partner and father of my children was very unhappy with the situation in South Africa. And it was one of those things where I thought, right now I have to do what's best for the greater good. Right. And so we looked at places to immigrate to. And honestly, it was like a lottery system for us. We applied to Australia, we applied to Canada. Both countries said it would take 3 years. And about 5 months later, we got visas from Canada. So Canada picked itself. Canada picked me.
Right. Well, that's kind of a lovely story, because I love the fact that you were open to opportunities and stepping outside the comfort zone, right?
Absolutely. And there's actually a really nice little icing on that story. When we were due to get our Canadian citizenship, we had the date for the whole family, and I fell really ill. So my husband and my children went to their citizenship ceremony, and I had to be scheduled for another date. And the date I got was Valentine's Day. And I don't remember the title of the gentleman who was doing it, but he was one of the big people. I was the first person that he spoke to, and he said to me, "Canada has chosen you as its Valentine." And I said to him, "Canada's chosen me twice."
Isn't that amazing?
It is. Yeah.
That's a really wonderful story, because, the synchronicities of life sometimes are in the stories that we share and the things that we remember.
That's right.
Right. So that's a pretty poignant story for you to remember and share, because it gives you hope that there are opportunities outside of the boundaries that we seem to feel that we set for ourselves, right?
Correct. Absolutely. So I've lived and worked in many places, and wherever the opportunity takes me, I will certainly consider it.
Well, that's a wonderful attitude to have. And I think that no matter what stage and age we are in life, it opens the doors.
Indeed.
Right?
Yeah. Indeed.
One of the things that you shared in your story was a definition for self-empowerment that I would like you to share with our viewing and listening audience, because I think that your definition helps to solidify to anyone who's unsure about what that really means. So would you share that with us?
Well, probably since we originally spoke, it's evolved a little, Trish, because I continually, as you know, now I'm really focused on working with women. Mm-hmm. But this 4A model for me is all about self-empowerment. And originally I had 3 A's, but I finally realized there's a 4th A in this model. And so, we all need to recognize that we have autonomy, despite the fact that we are surrounded by people, whether in a large corporation or we're a solopreneur, we do have autonomy. In other words, we have the ability to choose. Mm-hmm. The second thing is we have agency, which means we have the power to choose if we wish to use that or exercise it. Then, of course, we also have this whole thing that is really around alignment. So authenticity. Is what I'm doing, is what I'm choosing to do aligned with my values? And then finally, we actually have personal authority, which is a much deeper inner kind of existential awareness of ourselves. And so when I look at those 4 A's, to me, those are the things that we need to think about. That's what really empowers us. Empowerment doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. And I think we all need to realize that we are always at choice. You know, probably that I've done a lot of work around people pleasing. And sometimes, there's loads of us who are wonderful, generous people, and that's fantastic. But sometimes our generosity gets in the way, especially when we're in business and we may make choices and then afterwards resent it, whether it's towards our family or towards a customer or client. For me, when you decide to offer your generosity to someone and it's a conscious decision, so you've made a commitment, I'm going to put my family first. I'm not going to take that job because my partner or my children have something going on. then you don't end up in a place of resentment because you actually have been at choice. You have exercised your autonomy and your agency, and it's aligned with your values. And so you come away from that thinking, well, it might have put a bit of pressure on me, but I'm so pleased I did that. And this is about really being conscious about how you empower yourself.
There's so much to unpack just in that, that sharing of that information. And one of the things that you're developing and taking out into the world is a tool to try to help people, right?
That's right.
Give us an indication, because I know you've been doing test groups and workshop studies, and you've been getting a lot of input and information before you sort of finalize the information, and I'm sure you're going to trademark it and copyright it and do all of that sort of thing. Can you share at this point and this stage in the development of the program, how are you finding the reaction from folks like myself who may be participating in some of these focus groups that you're conducting?
Mm-hmm. So the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. We live in a world where research has shown us that people feel lonely. Many people feel that they're not seen and heard. And many people, I think, are carrying stuff around that they don't know how to share, although they know that it would be helpful to them and possibly to others to share. Mm-hmm. And so what I have designed is a process that, for a talking circle, if you like, that's the word I would use. I have researched, obviously, from psychology and then looked at indigenous nations. So coming from South Africa, I've looked at the indigenous Black people and how they use talking circles to work through stuff. We have our own indigenous people here in Canada, in every part of the world. Talking and listening is really a key part of managing our mental health, managing our nervous system, becoming better citizens. And so I wanted to make sure that whatever I designed really encompassed that kind of idea. And so overwhelmingly, I've had positive responses. I'll share with you just the very first focus group I did was probably the one that surprised me the most because it was the first. Sure. So a group of women who didn't know each other came together. I explained to them what the process was. I said, I'm going to ask you for 2 hours to join in this process with me, and then we'll do about a 30-minute debrief. And another entrepreneur in town offered me a private space in her restaurant to run this, which was lovely. So we came together, never had met each other before. The process of the talking circle was beautiful. Then when it came to the bit of the debrief, this was midweek, I said, we can do, and they were like, no, we're not ready to debrief yet. We want to carry on with the talking circle.
Wow.
So we did a little debrief, and then I said, could I send you out a questionnaire? Yes, that'll be fine. And I have to say, everybody answered. But I had to leave because I had a 6 a.m. call the next morning. And at sort of 9:30 at night, I realized people should be going home. Everybody's getting up for work tomorrow. So I said, look, I need to leave. The lovely restaurateur told me that the women who came in never knowing each other before left at midnight.
Wow.
And so the connections that happen when you in a group of strangers, when you start talking about the things that you are carrying with you that are really about life's lessons, about what you've experienced, what your big questions are. So some of them might be traumatic and some of them might be joyful. It's a continuum. You get to choose. But it's amazing how it connects women with those threads that I see are universal if you identify as female. It doesn't matter your age, it doesn't matter your education level, it doesn't matter your race, nothing else matters. If you identify as female, there are certain things that absolutely will connect us. The interesting thing is, I've now had a request from quite a number of women to please develop something for men.
Well, we are becoming a little bit more in tune with our, with our ourselves and our inner self, which never was a topic of conversation before, right?
Right. So there will be more. I will develop other content for different sorts of purposes, maybe some even specifically for leaders in organizations. But I'm so delighted that I'm actually now ready to launch. I've done all my pilots, I've done all my IP stuff, and here we go. That's why I took a holiday to Africa to get ready for the rest of this year that's going to be big.
Oh, good for you. Now, I'm going to ask you to come back and spend some time with us at another time to specifically talk about the IP process, because we speak to individuals from all over the world, as you know, who have wonderful, great ideas, but they really don't know how to protect them. Mm-hmm. Because let's face it, yes, we're doing what we're doing to help the global good, but we also need to be practical about the business side of the business.
100%. We always do. Right? Yes. Yes.
And sometimes we forget that. We get so caught up in the weeds that we sometimes forget that there's a process behind the process that we need to actually take care of. And so I'm going to ask you to, we'll book a different date and time. And perhaps what I'll do is get a few other ladies who are also talking about this IP process to share some of your experiences, because I think that's invaluable to those who have great ideas that need to take the next step, whatever that may be.
I 100% agree with you, Trish. And one thing I'm going to say right here is when I designed my Hidden Gems tool, I wasn't even thinking about IP because imposter syndrome was in the way. And I thought, I'm just going to use this for myself.
Right.
And when I showed it to a few other women who I highly respect, and they went, oh my word, this is absolutely stellar.
Right.
You need to protect it. That actually in itself was an opening for me that I had been feeling too tentative to step through.
Because, you know, we think that we don't realize the global impact that we may have because our own, right? We feel our circle of influence is small. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When sometimes we need somebody else who comes in with a different line of sight to say, hey, this is actually much bigger than you think it is. So let's talk about
that's where the excitement comes when someone else looks at it and says, don't keep this for yourself. It needs to be out in the world.
Right. Right. Well, we'll do that. If you're open to that opportunity, I'm going to set up a panel discussion and we'll ensure that we, in the show notes, that we make the connection so that we can continue the conversation and talk about IP.
Sounds great.
One of the things that we do in the guest blog is we get folks to share 3 words of advice. So I'm going to ask you to wrap up our conversation today to share with our viewing and listening audience, why is love yourself first an important component to the work that you're doing?
You know, you're the most important person in your life. You were from the moment you were born, but you probably didn't realize it until you were a young adult. Sometimes it takes us much longer to realize that. Mm-hmm. If you are going to be a great business person, no matter how big or small your business is, you need to love yourself first, because entrepreneurship is hard. It can feel lonely. It can feel rough. It can feel competitive, not in a good way at times. And if you are not in your own corner, and if you're not looking after your health and your welfare and just your inner essence, then it's going to really grind you down and I think limit your possibilities. And this love yourself first actually came from some wisdom that my dad shared with me when I was a young girl. My dad owned a construction company and I used to go and help him tidy up his office sometimes on a Saturday morning. And he said to me, you must always think about people first, then money, then things. And you know, when he was talking people first, I realized he was talking about the people who worked for him and his customers. But one of the things he did not do was look after himself. And so in my journey, I was like, I'm a people too. That people first means me as well. And so love yourself first is really important to me.
You know, I think your father was a very powerful influence in your life. He not only got you behind the race car and taught you how to enjoy the joie de vivre of life through speed, but he also gave you some really poignant tips that you've been able to take through your life. Indeed. And I'm sure you're very grateful for that.
I am indeed. Absolutely.
I want to thank you for joining me today, Gucci, and giving us some insight into your business story. You've given us so many wonderful nuggets of information, and I'm sure our viewing and listening audience has been taking notes. So we look forward to our continuing the conversation when we get together again to talk about IP.
It's been wonderful. Thanks for having me on, Trish.
To you, our viewing and listening audience, I'd like to thank you for tuning in to this edition of Keeping It Real. And I'd like to send my personal thanks to all of our sponsors for their ongoing support, and ask that you share and invite your friends and colleagues to subscribe to our show, Business Mentorship, Keeping It Real, found on YouTube and your favorite podcast channel. Gucci and I would like to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you next time when we meet another business owner and celebrate their great idea.